They laughed. Not the small, friendly kind of laugh you can shrug off, but that hollow, pointed laughter that slices quiet rooms into before and after. I felt it like a physical thing, a pressure in my chest that made my hands go cold and my vision tunnel. They thought I was a relic, someone who belonged to battlefields and after-action reports, not to boardrooms and glossy client lists. They mocked my past like it was a punchline. That moment, their amusement, their casual cruelty, lit something in me that I didn't realize was still burning. A patient kind of anger that knows the value of timing and the precision of planning. I wasn't born to be loud. Military life taught me the opposite: measure, observe, and act when the conditions are right. For 12 years I led men through situations where mistakes meant more than embarrassment. When I left active duty, I believed civilian life would be quieter, softer, a place to rebuild without the constant adrenaline. I found work at a private security firm made of ex-servicemen and some corporate types who loved the idea of heroes in suits. At first it felt right. The camaraderie, the shared shorthand, the easy jokes, but very slowly, the easy jokes hardened into little exclusions, the shorthand into snide comments. I was told I was old-fashioned, that I didn't understand how business really worked. It stung, but more than the sting was the pity in their voices, the wordless assumption that a soldier couldn't be strategic outside of war. Then the sabotage started. Files I'd stayed up late to prepare would be misplaced. Meetings I chaired would be mischaracterized afterward by the same people who swatted away my ideas as outdated. Small humiliations accumulated until they became a pattern. The final cut came at a quarterly review, a meeting meant to showcase our wins. I presented the work I'd done, the contracts I'd secured, the careful risk assessments. When I finished, one of them smirked and said in front of the whole room, "Nice to see someone who still likes following orders." Laughter bloomed around me like a tide. My boss laughed too. The man who'd once trusted me with key clients. I didn't shout. I didn't try to justify myself. I walked out. Outside, the parking lot was empty and cold. The anger didn't roar, it settled into me like a plan. That night I didn't call anyone. I booked a small hotel room on the edge of town where the elevators never made noise and the curtains were thick enough to blot out a bad day. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the kind of anonymity you only get in places that service business travelers. I spread my old unit photos on the bed, touched the worn edges of a folded patch, and thought about what honor meant when the people around you had stopped knowing the meaning of the word. Revenge, I decided, wouldn't be a midnight fistfight or a headline-grabbing outburst. It would be surgical. It would be undeniable. It would expose the rot in the place that laughed at my integrity. Above all, it would be clean, justice presented in a way the world couldn't ignore. I called 4 names. These were men and women I had bled with. The kind of people who know the sound of your breathing in sleep and still trust you when you are raw. One was a former field intel analyst who now did corporate compliance. Another was a cyber professional who left the agency to consult on digital security. A third was an old buddy who handled logistics and knew how bureaucracies folded when pressure was applied in the right places. They arrived one by one that afternoon, boots clicking on cheap hotel carpet, faces drawn but steady. We didn't waste time on small talk. I laid out the story calmly, like listing coordinates, the mockery, the adjustments to reports, the misattributed credit, the small lies that protected much larger ones. I told them what I knew and what I suspected. And then I told them what I wanted, not to humiliate for the thrill of it, but to make sure those men couldn't keep harming people because they were good at pretending. We worked like a team that had trained for this long before it became personal. I want to be clear about how we did what we did because there's a difference between fiction and a how-to manual. Nothing we did involved breaking the law or giving technical lessons on intrusion. Instead, we followed paths available to anyone who knows where to look: records, paper trails, inconsistencies in contracts, the human cracks that appear when people think they are invisible. My compliance friend had a way of making bureaucracies cough up hidden clauses. My cyber-savvy friend performed forensic reviews on copies of files we'd obtained through legitimate channels, spotting patterns and timestamps that told a story. We interviewed a handful of people, low-level staff who were scared but willing to talk when they believed someone on the outside cared. Every piece we added to the folder felt heavier, more real, until we had a weight in our hands that could no longer be shrugged away as rumor. There were nights of laughter too. Late at night in that hotel room, after the glow of laptop screens and the clicking of keyboards faded, we'd trade stories about ridiculous orders we'd once followed in uniform, the kind of absurdity that bonds people who've seen too much. Those stories kept the whole enterprise from feeling vengeful in the petty sense. We were trying to right a wrong, to take a crooked operation and make it accountable. Sometimes revenge is a cold thing, and sometimes it's a moral imperative dressed as payback. For me, it became the latter. We were not avengers for hire. We were a handful of former soldiers and professionals who refused to watch a culture of dishonesty eat away at people who trusted that firm with their futures. Timing was everything. There are moments where the world concentrates: shareholder meetings, contract signings, press briefings, and the damage done by truth is amplified by the audience. We chose the firm's investor day, A morning of polished presentations where executives preened and painted over imperfections with glossy performance metrics. We decided not to ambush anyone with violence or public shaming. Instead, we prepared a presentation of the evidence that was meticulous and plainly factual, misreported revenue figures traced through bank records, contracts with clauses that funneled money through shell entities, internal emails that showed willful ignorance of compliance issues. Each slide was a piece of the puzzle, and together they formed a picture too coherent to dismiss. Walking into that conference hall felt strange. These were the same corridors where I'd once been dismissed as old-fashioned. The same faces wore the same comfortable arrogance. They greeted me with forced smiles, the kind you hand someone who's inconvenient but known. I took a seat near the back, one of my team sitting beside me like a shadow. When the CEO wrapped up his triumphant spiel about growth and transparency, I asked, politely, if I could say a few words. The murmur of the room shifted into a puzzled hush. I didn't need to raise my voice. I handed a dossier, a simple, unadorned packet, to the chair of the audit committee and asked that they review the attachments. Then the projector came alive. What followed was not the dramatic music bed scene of a movie, but something more damning: facts, data with dates, names, and paper trails. A chain of evidence that showed how money moved and whose hands it touched. The faces around me changed as the light from the screen warmed their expressions: confusion, disbelief, then the pale shock of people realizing the ground under their feet had been pulled away. Phones went up. Whispers started. The head of legal opened the binder with a hand that trembled. My former boss face ran through colors I'd only seen once before, in a foreign town when a mission had gone sideways and someone realized the lie had been found. He looked at me, and for the first time since the parking lot, I felt his fear. I spoke only once after the evidence played. I told the room that I had been on the receiving end of their jokes and their small cruelties, and that more than being mocked, I was tired of seeing decisions made that put clients and employees at risk. I didn't accuse, I presented. The difference matters. Accusation is noise, proof is a gavel. Within hours of that meeting, the company's compliance hotline had a flood of calls from employees who hadn't dared speak before. Regulators emailed. Several investors announced they would demand independent audits. The CEO put out a short statement promising cooperation, and then an even shorter one announcing his resignation. I watched the fall like a weather system moving across the city, inevitable and clean. After it was over, people reached out. Journalists wanted interviews. Colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years called to say they were glad. Friends sent messages that ranged from joyous to worried. My phone buzzed more in those 48 hours than it had in a year. We had not burned anyone. We had illuminated. That distinction was important to us because revenge that destroys without purpose is hollow. The firm had hurt people and hid behind bravado. We exposed the harm and let the appropriate institutions do their jobs. Some of the men who had mocked me disappeared into quieter lives. Others attempted to rebuild with scorched reputations. A few reached out with apologies that felt like trying to mend armor with tape. I accepted none of the public ones. Private remorse is worth more than a press release. There was a quiet moment later that week when my team and I returned to that hotel room. The same shabby refuge where the plan had taken shape. We ordered food that tasted better than it had any right to and opened beers that went warm too quickly in the stale air. We didn't toast to revenge. We clinked glasses for one simple reason: we had held fast to a moral line. We could have taken different paths. We chose the one that left us with our consciences intact. We laughed at old radio calls and the way a sunburned lieutenant once tried to salute with the wrong hand. The laughter was a salve. In the end, the thing I wanted most wasn't the toppling of men, but the restoration of a world where someone's work and honor matter. People sometimes ask me if I feel redeemed. I think redemption is a private thing, a slow repair you do within yourself by making choices that match your values. The world will never be simple. There will always be people who use charm as a mask for cruelty, who think mockery is harmless, who build empires on the backs of others. What this experience taught me is not how to take revenge, it taught me how to turn a grievance into action that seeks accountability rather than spectacle. It reminded me that patience and calm can be more devastating than rage because they allow you to act with clarity, not reaction. If there is a lesson in this for anyone who's been mocked or sidelined, it's this: respect yourself enough to choose your response. Some things you let pass, others you set right. You don't have to become the thing that hurt you to make them pay. You can be precise, lawful, and unshowy, and yet change the course of a life. I went into that hotel room a man who had been humiliated, and I walked out a man who understood that sometimes the perfect revenge is simply to refuse to be small anymore. The rest, the investigations, the resignations, the quiet phone calls from people who finally felt safe, were the consequences of a decision to act with purpose. In the end, I didn't want them ruined for sport. I wanted the truth to matter more than their laughter.